The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla walked slowly through the corridors she had called home for nearly 2 years. Her footsteps echoed softly on the polished marble floors. But today, the familiar sound brought her no comfort. Everything felt different since Charles had made his decision. 3 days earlier, King Charles III had summoned his private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, to his study. The conversation that followed would change everything for Camilla and her family. Charles sat behind his mahogany desk, his fingers drumming nervously on the leather surface as he struggled to find the right words. "Clive, we need to discuss the arrangements regarding the Queen's family," Charles began, his voice heavy with reluctance. "The recent media attention and public criticism have reached an unacceptable level." Sir Clive shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had seen this coming for weeks. The tabloids had been relentless in their coverage of Camilla's children and grandchildren, questioning their roles within the royal household and their access to palace resources. The public, still adjusting to Camilla as queen, had grown increasingly vocal about what they perceived as favoritism toward her family. "Your Majesty, perhaps we could consider a more gradual approach," Sir Clive suggested carefully. "The Queen's family has been very supportive during the transition period." Charles raised his hand, stopping the conversation. "I've made my decision, Clive. Effective immediately. All formal ties between the Crown and the Queen's extended family will be severed. No more official invitations, no more palace accommodations, and no more public appearances as representatives of the royal family." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sir Clive knew what this meant for Camilla. Her children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, along with her beloved grandchildren, would be cut off from the world they had gradually become part of. More importantly, Charles was asking his wife to choose between her crown and her family. Meanwhile, Camilla was in the blue drawing room, sharing afternoon tea with her daughter Laura and her 5 grandchildren. The children's laughter filled the ornate space as they played a gentle game of hide-and-seek among the antique furniture. 10-year-old Eliza bounced excitedly on the silk-covered settee, while her twin brothers, Louis and Gus, tried to peek behind the heavy velvet curtains. "Granny, when can we come back and play in the big garden again?" little Freddie asked, tugging at Camilla's pearl necklace with innocent curiosity. Camilla's heart clenched. She had no idea that within hours, she would have to explain to these precious children why they wouldn't be visiting their grandmother's home anymore. She pulled Freddie onto her lap and smoothed his unruly hair. "We'll see, darling," she whispered, fighting back tears she didn't yet understand. Laura noticed her mother's distant expression. "Mummy, are you all right? You seem troubled." Before Camilla could respond, one of the palace footmen appeared at the doorway. "Your Majesty. His Majesty requests your presence in his private study at your earliest convenience." The formal tone sent a chill down Camilla's spine. In their private moments, Charles never summoned her through staff. Something was wrong. "Children, why don't you continue your game with Aunt Laura while Granny speaks with Grandpapa Charles?" Camilla said, forcing brightness into her voice. The walk to Charles's study felt endless. Camilla's mind raced with possibilities. Had something happened to one of his sons? Was there a constitutional crisis brewing? She knocked gently on the heavy oak door and entered when she heard his familiar voice bidding her to come in. Charles stood with his back to her, gazing out the window at the London skyline. His shoulders were rigid with tension, and he didn't turn when she entered. This was not the warm, loving husband she had come to know during their private moments. "Charles, you wanted to see me?" He finally turned, and Camilla was shocked by the anguish in his eyes. This was a man torn between duty and love, between the crown and his heart. "Please, sit down, my darling," he said softly, gesturing to the leather chairs arranged before his fireplace. Camilla settled into her chair, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Years of royal training had taught her to remain composed, even when her world felt like it was spinning out of control. "Camilla, what I'm about to tell you is one of the most difficult decisions I've ever had to make," Charles began, his voice barely above a whisper. "The pressure from Parliament, the media, and the public regarding your family's involvement with the crown has become untenable." Camilla felt her blood run cold. "What are you saying?" Charles, I'm saying that effective immediately, Tom, Laura, and the children will no longer have any formal connection to the royal family. No more palace visits, no more state functions, no more royal protection. The words hit Camilla like physical blows. She gripped the arms of her chair to steady herself, her knuckles turning white. You're cutting them off completely? It's not what I want, Camilla. You must believe that. But the alternative is to watch the monarchy face a crisis that could threaten its very existence. The public sentiment has turned against what they perceive as nepotism. Camilla stood abruptly, her careful composure cracking. These are my children, Charles. My grandchildren. They're not political pawns to be sacrificed for public approval ratings. I know, Charles said, rising to face her. And it's killing me to ask this of you. But I'm not just your husband anymore, Camilla. I'm the king. And I have responsibilities that extend far beyond our personal happiness. The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla stared at her husband, seeing not the man who had loved her through scandal and triumph, but the institution he represented. For the first time since their marriage, she felt truly alone. How long do they have? She asked quietly. Sir Clive will make the arrangements. They need to be gone by the end of the week. Camilla nodded slowly, her mind already racing ahead to the impossible conversation she would need to have with her family. How do you explain to your children that their stepfather, the King of England, no longer wants them around? How do you tell your grandchildren that they can't visit Granny's house anymore because some people in the country don't think they belong there? I need some air, she said finally, moving toward the door. Camilla, please try to understand. I understand perfectly. Charles, she interrupted, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. I understand that when it comes down to choosing between the crown and the people you claim to love, the crown will always win. With that, she left the study, closing the door behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded final. Camilla made her way through the palace corridors, past the portraits of long-dead monarchs, who stared down at her with painted eyes that seemed to judge her every step. She passed the blue drawing room where she could hear her grandchildren's innocent laughter, a sound that now felt like a dagger through her heart. Instead of returning to them, she continued walking until she reached the palace gardens. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting everything in a golden glow that felt mocking in its beauty. She found herself at the small memorial garden that had been created for Queen Elizabeth II, a quiet space filled with her late mother-in-law's favorite flowers. Camilla sank onto a wooden bench, finally allowing the tears she had been holding back to fall freely. Here, surrounded by the roses and lavender that Elizabeth had loved, she felt the full weight of what Charles was asking of her. The old queen had accepted Camilla eventually, had even grown to appreciate her dedication to Charles and her service to the crown. But now it seemed that acceptance meant nothing in the face of public opinion. A gentle rustling in the bushes caught her attention. She looked up to see one of the palace guards, a young man named James whom she had come to know over the past months, attempting to blend into the background while maintaining his protective duties. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw something unexpected there. Sympathy, perhaps even understanding. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, James said quietly. I couldn't help but notice you seemed distressed. Is there anything I can do? Camilla wiped her tears with the back of her hand, suddenly aware of how undignified she must look. Queens weren't supposed to cry in gardens where anyone could see them. No, thank you, James. I'm quite all right. But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. Nothing would ever be quite all right again. Tomorrow, she would have to break her family's hearts to save a monarchy that increasingly felt like a golden cage. Tonight, she would lie beside a husband who loved her but loved his duty more. As the sun disappeared behind the palace walls, Camilla remained in the garden, gathering the strength she would need for the most difficult conversation of her life. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear her grandchildren calling for her, their voices growing more distant as Laura likely herded them away from the windows. Soon, those voices would be gone forever, silenced not by distance but by the cold calculations of constitutional monarchy. The crown had demanded its sacrifice, and Charles had chosen to give it exactly what it wanted, even if it meant breaking the heart of the woman he claimed to love above all others. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching Camilla's mood as she sat at her dressing table while her lady-in-waiting, Margaret, carefully arranged her hair. The routine felt hollow now, like putting makeup on a corpse. What was the point of looking regal when everything she held dear was about to be stripped away? "Your Majesty seems quite pale this morning," Margaret observed gently. "Perhaps a bit more color in the cheeks?" Camilla stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror. The woman looking back at her appeared older than her years, with lines of worry etched around her eyes that hadn't been there just days before. "No, Margaret. I think pale suits me today." A soft knock interrupted her preparations. "Come in," she called, expecting to see Charles with an apology, or perhaps Sir Clive with more devastating news. Instead, her son Tom appeared in the doorway, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced by concern. "Mum, we need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "Laura's been trying to reach you since last night, and the children are asking why they can't explore the palace today like you promised." Camilla dismissed Margaret with a gentle nod, and waited until they were alone before turning to face her son. Tom had always been her rock, the practical one who could find solutions to any problem, but there would be no solving this crisis. "Sit down, darling," she said, patting the small settee near her window. Tom studied his mother's face and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. "Mum, you're scaring me. What's happened?" Camilla took a deep breath, drawing on every ounce of strength she possessed. "Your stepfather has made a decision about our family's relationship with the royal household." "What kind of decision?" "You, Laura, and the children are being asked to step back from any official connection to the crown. No more palace visits, no more royal events, no more." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "No more family dinners here." Tom sat in stunned silence for several moments. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with anger. "He's cutting us off? Just like that?" "The pressure from the public and Parliament has become too much. Charles feels he has no choice." "No choice?" Tom stood abruptly, beginning to pace the small space. "He's the bloody King of England. If anyone has choices, it's him." "Lower your voice, please," Camilla whispered. The staff already know, don't they?" Tom's laugh was bitter. "I'm sure they've all been briefed on how to escort the unwanted relatives off the premises." Camilla flinched at his words because they contained more truth than she wanted to admit. "Tom, please try to understand. Charles is struggling with this decision too." "Is he?" "Because, from where I'm standing, it looks like he made this decision quite easily. Did he even fight for us? Mum, did he try to find another solution?" The question hung in the air because Camilla didn't have a good answer. Had Charles fought for her family? Had he exhausted every other option before choosing this nuclear approach? She wanted to believe he had, but the speed with which the decision had been made suggested otherwise. "I need to tell the children," she said finally, avoiding Tom's question. "Will you bring them here?" Tom's expression softened as he saw the pain in his mother's eyes. Despite his anger at Charles, he couldn't bear to see her suffer. "Are you sure you want to do this alone? Laura and I could help." "No. This should come from me." 20 minutes later, Camilla found herself surrounded by 5 confused grandchildren in the blue drawing room. Eliza, the oldest at 10, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation and sat quietly on the edge of the sofa. The younger ones, Louis, Gus, Freddie, and little Lola, fidgeted with typical childish energy, unaware that their world was about to change forever. "Granny, can we go see the horses today?" Freddie asked eagerly. "You promised we could visit the royal mews." Camilla's heart broke a little more. "I'm afraid not today, my darling. In fact, Granny needs to tell you all something rather important." She had rehearsed this conversation in her mind dozens of times, trying to find words that would be honest without being devastating. But looking at these innocent faces, she realized there was no gentle way to deliver this news. "Children, sometimes grown-ups have to make very difficult decisions, even when those decisions hurt people we love very much." Eliza straightened, her young face growing serious. "What kind of decisions, Granny?" "Well, you know how Granny lives here in this big palace with Grandpapa Charles?" Nods all around. Sometimes, being the king and queen means we have to think about what's best for the whole country, not just what makes our family happy. The children exchanged worried glances. Even the youngest ones were beginning to understand that something was wrong. The thing is, darlings, some people in the country think it's not fair for Granny's family to spend so much time here at the palace. They think other families should have the same chances you've had. But we're your grandchildren, Louis protested, his 7-year-old logic cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Of course we should be here with you. Yes, you are my grandchildren. And I love you more than all the stars in the sky. But Grandpapa Charles has decided that, to be fair to everyone, our family visits need to stop for a while. The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla watched as understanding dawned on each little face, and she felt like she was witnessing their childhood innocence being shattered in real time. How long is a while? Eliza asked, her voice small. Camilla couldn't bring herself to say, forever. So she settled for a truth that was somehow worse. I don't know, sweetheart. I honestly don't know. Little Lola, barely 4 years old, climbed onto Camilla's lap and wrapped her arms around her grandmother's neck. But I don't want to go, Granny. I like it here. The guards always smile at me. That simple statement nearly broke Camilla's composure entirely. These children had never asked for royal privilege or special treatment. They had simply enjoyed visiting their grandmother in her new home, playing in gardens most children could only dream of, and feeling special because their granny wore a crown. I know you like it here, my precious girl. Granny likes having you here too. But sometimes we have to do things we don't like because other people need us to. Is Grandpapa Charles angry with us? Freddie asked quietly. Did we do something wrong? The innocent question was like a dagger through Camilla's heart. These children were blaming themselves for the adults' political maneuvering. Oh no, my darling boy, you haven't done anything wrong. None of you have. This isn't about you being naughty or bad. This is about grown-up problems that are much too complicated for children to worry about. Gus, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. Mummy says that when grown-ups make decisions that hurt children, those grown-ups aren't being very grown-up at all. From the mouths of babes, Camilla thought, Laura had clearly prepared her children better than she had prepared herself. Your mummy is a very wise woman, Camilla said carefully. And she's not wrong. The conversation continued for another painful hour, as Camilla tried to answer their questions without destroying their faith in the adults who were supposed to protect them. When Tom finally came to collect them, each child hugged their grandmother as if they sensed they might not see her again for a very long time. Will you still be our granny even if we can't come here? Lola whispered in her ear. Always and forever, my darling. Nothing and no one can ever change that. As the children filed out of the room with Tom, Eliza lingered behind. At 10, she was old enough to understand more than her younger cousins. Granny, is this like when Mummy and Daddy got divorced? Are you and Grandpapa Charles going to stop loving each other too? The question hit Camilla like a physical blow. The idea that her grandchildren might worry about another family dissolution because of this decision had never occurred to her. No, sweetheart. Grandpapa Charles and I love each other very much, and that will never change. Sometimes people who love each other have to make hard choices. But the love doesn't go away. Eliza nodded solemnly, seeming to accept this explanation even if she didn't fully understand it. After she left, Camilla sat alone in the blue drawing room, surrounded by the echoes of her grandchildren's voices and the weight of promises she wasn't sure she could keep. That evening, Charles found her in their private sitting room, staring into the fireplace with unseeing eyes. He had spent the day in meetings with Parliament and his advisors, all of whom had congratulated him on making the necessary sacrifice for the good of the monarchy. Their praise felt like acid in his veins. How did it go with the children? He asked quietly, settling into the chair across from her. How do you think it went, Charles? Her voice was flat, emotionless. I had to break the hearts of 5 innocent children because their existence has become politically inconvenient. Camilla, please don't. Don't what? Don't tell you the truth? Don't hold you accountable for the choice you made? She finally looked at him. To our Yujing see their live. To our Yujing see their live. And he was shocked by the emptiness in her eyes. Those children think they've done something wrong, Charles. They're blaming themselves for your decision. Charles felt sick. That wasn't my intention. You know that. Your intentions don't matter to a 4-year-old who doesn't understand why she can't visit her grandmother anymore. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the day's events settling between them like an impenetrable wall. Finally, Charles spoke. The staff has prepared a statement for the press. It explains that your family is stepping back to pursue their own interests and give you space to focus on your royal duties. How thoughtful of them to lie on our behalf. It's not a lie, Camilla. It's a diplomatic way of, it's a lie, Charles. She turned to face him fully, and he saw a strength in her eyes that both impressed and frightened him. But I suppose lying is just another duty that comes with the crown, isn't it? That night, they slept in the same bed as they always did. But there might as well have been an ocean between them. Charles lay awake listening to Camilla's quiet breathing and wondering if he had just traded his family's happiness for a monarchy that might not survive anyway. In the morning, he would watch his wife's children pack their belongings and leave the palace for the last time. He would see the confusion and hurt in his step-grandchildren's eyes as they were ushered past the guards who had become their friends. And he would realize that winning the approval of Parliament and the press felt remarkably hollow when it came at the cost of the people he loved most in the world. The final day arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if nature itself was mocking the coldness that had settled over the royal household. Camilla stood at her bedroom window, watching as several unmarked cars pulled up to the palace's private entrance. Her family's departure was to be as discreet as possible. No media, no fanfare, just a quiet erasure of 2 years of tentative belonging. Sir Clive had orchestrated the logistics with military precision. Tom and Laura would collect their personal items, sign some papers regarding confidentiality, and then simply disappear from royal life, as if they had never been part of it at all. The efficiency of it all made Camilla feel sick. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, not turning from the window. "Your Majesty?" It was James, the young guard who had shown her kindness in the garden just 2 days ago. "Forgive the intrusion, but your family has arrived." Camilla closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself for what was to come. "Thank you, James. I'll be down presently." "Ma'am?" James hesitated at the door. "If I may say so, the staff. We're all very sorry about this situation. Your family brought a lot of joy to the palace." The unexpected kindness from this young man nearly broke her composure. "Thank you, James. That means more to me than you know." Downstairs in the marble hall, Camilla found her family gathered with their small collection of belongings. It was heartbreaking how little they were taking with them. A few photographs, some gifts the children had been given, personal items that had accumulated over 2 years of growing attachment to this place. Laura stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of barely controlled anger. Tom was kneeling beside the children, trying to distract them with a handheld game, but even they seemed to understand that this wasn't an ordinary departure. "Mummy," Camilla said softly, using Laura's childhood name for her. Laura looked up, and Camilla saw tears in her daughter's eyes that she was fighting not to shed. "Mummy, how could he do this to us? How could he do this to you?" Before Camilla could answer, Charles appeared at the top of the grand staircase. He moved slowly down the steps, each one seeming to require enormous effort. When he reached the bottom, an awkward silence settled over the group. "Tom, Laura," he said formally, "thank you for understanding the necessity of this decision." Tom stood up slowly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Understanding it and accepting it are 2 very different things, Charles. I know this is difficult. Do you?" Tom's voice was quietly furious. "Do you really know what it's like to watch your mother choose between her children and her husband? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you made that choice for her." Charles flinched at the accusation but didn't deny it. "I'm trying to protect the institution that your mother serves." "No," Laura spoke up, her voice shaking with emotion. "You're protecting yourself. You're taking the easy way out, instead of fighting for the people who love you." Little Freddie tugged on his mother's coat. "Mummy, why is everyone so angry?" The innocent question cut through the adult tension like a knife. Laura knelt down and gathered her son into her arms, her voice gentle despite her tears. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about important things. Darling, it doesn't mean anyone has stopped loving anyone else. But even as she said the words, Laura wondered if they were true. Looking at her mother's pale, drawn face and Charles's rigid posture, she wasn't sure love was enough to survive what was happening here. Eliza, ever observant, approached her step-grandfather with the directness that only children possess. "Grandpapa Charles, are you sad about us leaving?" Charles looked down at the little girl who had brought him so much joy over the past 2 years. He remembered teaching her to identify different birds in the palace gardens, reading her stories in his study while she curled up in the big leather chair beside his desk. The memory of her laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for decades suddenly made his chest tight with regret. "Yes, Eliza," he admitted quietly. "I'm very sad about it." "Then why are you making us go?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Charles opened his mouth to give her the same explanation he had given everyone else. Duty. Necessity. The greater good. But looking into her trusting eyes, the words died in his throat. "Because sometimes being a king means making choices that hurt the people you care about," he said finally. "That doesn't sound like a very good job," Eliza replied with devastating honesty. Charles felt something break inside his chest. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes it really isn't." Sir Clive appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there are some papers that need to be signed before the departure." The businesslike interruption shattered the moment of vulnerable honesty between Charles and his step-granddaughter. The machinery of the monarchy was moving forward, grinding personal feelings beneath its wheels with ruthless efficiency. As Tom and Laura were led away to sign confidentiality agreements and formal statements about their voluntary withdrawal from royal life, Camilla found herself alone with the children in the vast marble hall. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the walls that had once felt welcoming but now seemed cold and imposing. "Granny, will we see you at Christmas?" Lola asked, slipping her tiny hand into Camilla's. Camilla's heart shattered. Christmas was still months away. But this 4-year-old was already trying to find hope in the future, already trying to figure out how to maintain their relationship despite the obstacles being placed in their path. "I don't know, my darling," Camilla admitted. "But I promise you that Granny will always love you, no matter what. Even if we can't come to your house anymore? Even then." The children seemed to accept this with the resilience that children possess. But Camilla knew the real impact wouldn't be felt for months, or even years to come. These children would grow up remembering that their grandmother had chosen duty over family, even if they never understood the political forces that had driven that choice. When Tom and Laura returned from their meeting with Sir Clive, their faces were grim. Whatever they had been required to sign had clearly been more extensive than simple departure papers. "Right then," Tom said with forced cheerfulness, clapping his hands together. "Children, let's gather our things. It's time to go home." Clapping his hands said, "Children, let's the vilio. Children, let's gather our things. Children, let's gather our things. On ride. End of Indy. There." Always. The next few minutes were a blur of tearful goodbyes and promises to stay in touch, somehow. Camilla hugged each grandchild as if she was memorizing the feel of them in her arms. She whispered words of love and encouragement, trying to give them something to hold on to in the confusing days ahead. Laura was the last to say goodbye. Mother and daughter stood facing each other in the ornate hallway, where Laura had once felt so proud to visit, and now she felt like an unwelcome intruder. "Mummy, you don't have to stay here," Laura said quietly. "You could come with us. You could choose your family over this institution that's treating you so badly." For a moment, Camilla was tempted. The idea of walking away from the crown, from Charles, from the impossible balancing act of being queen while having her heart torn in two. It was appealing in a way that surprised her. "I can't, darling," she said finally. "I made a commitment when I married Charles. Not just to him, but to the people of this country." "What about your commitment to us? What about your promise to be our mother and grandmother first, queen second?" The accusation was fair, and Camilla had no good answer for it. "I'm trying to be both. You can't serve two masters, Mummy. You taught me that when I was little. Eventually, one of them demands everything, and the other gets nothing. With that, Laura kissed her mother's cheek and walked toward the door where her family was waiting. Camilla watched her children and grandchildren file out of the palace, each small figure disappearing through the doorway like pieces of her heart being carried away. The massive door closed behind them with a sound that echoed through the empty hall like a gunshot. Camilla stood frozen in place, staring at the closed door as if she could will it to open again. Will this nightmare to be just a bad dream? But the door remained closed, and the silence that followed was deafening. Charles approached her slowly, reaching out as if to touch her shoulder, but she stepped away from him. "Don't," she said quietly. "Camilla, just don't." For several minutes, they stood in the marble hall together, but completely apart. The weight of what had just happened settled around them like a shroud. This wasn't just about Camilla's family leaving the palace. It was about the fundamental change in their relationship, the crack in their foundation that might never be repaired. "The guard, James mentioned that you wanted to speak with him," Charles said eventually, desperate to fill the silence with something. Anything. Camilla looked up, confused. "I didn't ask to speak with James." Before Charles could respond, the young guard appeared in the doorway. His face flushed with what looked like a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Your Majesty, forgive the presumption, but I felt I needed to speak with you both." Charles frowned. "James, this is highly irregular." "Yes, sir, I know. But with respect, Your Majesty, what happened here today was wrong." The words hung in the air like a challenge. A simple guard questioning the decision of the King of England. It was unprecedented, potentially career-ending, and absolutely necessary. "I've served in this palace for 3 years," James continued, his voice growing stronger. "I've watched your family, Your Majesty, integrate into this household with grace and love. Those children brought joy to everyone here. The staff, the other guards, even the grounds crew. And watching them leave today, confused and heartbroken, was one of the hardest things I've ever had to witness." Charles's face had grown thunderous. "You're out of line, James." "Maybe I am, sir, but someone needed to say it." "Your Majesty," he turned to Camilla, "you've been nothing but gracious and kind to everyone in this household. You've treated the staff like human beings, not servants. You've brought warmth to rooms that had been cold for decades, and watching you sacrifice your family for an institution that should be serving you, not the other way around. It's heartbreaking." Camilla felt tears she had been holding back finally begin to fall. This young man, this brave, foolish, wonderful young man, was saying everything she hadn't been able to say herself. "James," Charles said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You're dismissed. Report to Sir Clive first thing tomorrow morning." "Charles, no," Camilla said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "James, thank you. Thank you for saying what needed to be said. Your Majesty, it was an honor to serve you and your family. I hope someday this wrong will be made right." With that, James bowed formally and left them alone once again. The silence that followed was different from before, charged with possibility, heavy with the weight of truth that had finally been spoken aloud. "He's right, you know," Camilla said quietly. Everything he said was right. Charles sank into one of the gilt chairs that lined the hall, suddenly looking every one of his 74 years. "I know." "Then why, Charles? Why did you do it?" "Because I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of losing the crown, scared of being the king who destroyed the monarchy, scared of letting down centuries of tradition and duty." "And you weren't scared of losing me?" Charles looked up at his wife. Really looked at her. And saw what his fear had cost him. Camilla stood before him like a ghost of herself, pale and hollow-eyed, her usual warmth extinguished by his choices. I thought you would understand. I thought you would forgive me, like you always have. Some things are unforgivable, Charles. Some choices change everything. And you can't take them back with apologies and explanations." As if to punctuate her words, the sound of car engines starting up drifted through the palace windows. Somewhere outside those walls, her family was driving away from the life they had tentatively begun to build. carrying with them the pieces of her heart that Charles had forced her to give up. "What happens now?" Charles asked. Camilla looked at her husband, the man she had loved through scandal and triumph, through public hatred and eventual acceptance. She thought about the vows they had made, the promises to support each other through everything life might throw at them. "Now we live with the choice you made," she said finally. "We wake up every morning in this beautiful palace that you valued more than your family's happiness. We attend state functions and smile for the cameras and pretend that everything is fine. And we hope that someday, somehow, we can figure out how to live with what we've lost." With that, Queen Camilla, consort of King Charles III, walked up the grand staircase to her chambers, leaving her husband alone in the marble hall with his crown and his duty, and the echo of children's laughter that would haunt these rooms forever. Outside, the guard James walked toward the staff quarters, his career likely over but his conscience clear. He had served his queen with honor, even if it meant standing against his king. And somewhere in London, 5 confused children asked their parents when they could see Granny again, not understanding that sometimes love isn't enough to overcome the weight of crowns and the coldness of duty. The palace settled into its evening routine, but something fundamental had changed within its walls. The warmth that had slowly grown during Camilla's reign had been extinguished, replaced by the chill of duty fulfilled at the cost of everything that truly mattered. And in her chambers, a queen wept for the family she had lost, and the marriage that might never recover from the choice that had seemed so necessary and felt so wrong.